I can sit.
Yes, you may.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can adjust the microphone to your height.
How are you? I don't want to talk too long because there's going to be this reading of my play, Marx and Soho, which I'm anxious to hear because I've never heard a reading of it. So I don't want to keep you here that long. I don't know how long the reading will take. No more than 6 hours. No, it's not that long. But Andy told you about the new edition of People's History. I can't say. Yes, there is the new edition, aside from having a blue cover instead of a yellow cover, which is probably the most important thing about it, it has a chapter on Reagan and Bush. But the old edition went up to the 1970s, the mid-1970s, because the old edition sort of came out around 1980 and went up to the mid-1970s. And so the idea is for me to do something on Reagan and Bush, painful as that is. But I actually wrote a chapter on Carter, Reagan, Bush, because I wanted to lump them together, even though they may not like it. Well, I'm not sure, actually. But so I did a chapter on Carter, Reagan, Bush, and then I did a chapter on what I call the unreported resistance. There's the things that were going on in the Carter, Reagan, Bush years that are not reported. That is, in Carter, Reagan, Bush, it's all policy, national policy, what the government is doing, right? But I wanted to say what was going on, in organizational work and actions, and to talk about, what is just not talked about in the media, and that is the fact that, there is somebody used this phrase, where did I get it? Oh, I know. Somebody was writing doing a book review in the New York Times, a review of a book called The Un-Americans, which includes Noam Chomsky and many others. I have a few lines here and there in it, but and so the reviewer said, well, this guy who wrote this book, The Un-Americans, may be a little hysterical. He said, but you've got to admit, he's not all wrong. There is a permanent adversarial culture in the United States. And I thought that was a nice phrase. A permanent adversarial culture. And that's true. And it's something that's not reported. Anyway, so I did that, and then I have this little what is it called? Postscript. Is that what it's called? Something like that. An afterword on the Clinton administration. Anyway, that's it. That's for that. I don't think I'll talk anymore. If any of you have any questions about anything, I can answer any question about anything in the world. I mean, that's right. That's what we're here for. People who stand up at the microphone, they know everything. So,
What was
yeah.
your rationale for lumping?
My rationale for lumping those
Carter,
three.
Reagan, and
Yeah,
Bush.
my rationale for lumping them together was to break through the traditional American division of liberal, conservative, Democratic, Republican, and to suggest that the real division is between the Democrats and Republicans on the one side and the adversarial culture on the other side. So I took as my starting theme something that Richard Hofstadter wrote about years ago when he wrote what I think is his best book, The American Political Tradition. Some of you know that book. But in it he dealt with, thanks, he dealt with the various presidents, mostly, conservatives, liberals, Theodore Roosevelt, Wilson, Hoover, Roosevelt, Andrew Jackson, the Founding Fathers. But his point was that whether you had a Roosevelt or a Hoover in there, whether you had a Grover Cleveland or a McKinley in there, that there was a persistent American political tradition that all of these so-called liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans had in common. And what they had in common, I'm putting it a little more crudely than Hofstadter, but then again, I put everything a little more crudely than Hofstadter, and that is what they had in common was a belief in capitalism and free enterprise and nationalism, which can be translated as war. And so I took that theme of the American political tradition. I suggest that Reagan, Carter, Bush all fit. Although, yes, there are differences and there are nuances, and but they all fit within that American political tradition of private enterprise, capitalism, and a tough militaristic foreign policy. Anyway, that's why, yes.
Would you talked about something like a permanent adversarial culture. Would you consider the right-wing militias that have been forming recently as part of that?
Well, that's not the permanent adversarial culture I have in mind, of course, but sure. Well, they are, who are they adversaries of? They're adversaries of the permanent adversarial culture. They're the far end of the spectrum of the American political tradition. Really, they're part of that spectrum. They're just, at the unsavory and embarrassing end of it. You see, when things within the political spectrum get too embarrassing, then the establishment gets nervous, and Nixon commits crimes, right? They get a little nervous, and they say, you're not behaving like members of the club. You're making things tough for us. You're antagonizing people. You're getting people to think that the system is like you. We don't want people to get that impression, although it's true. And so I think that's where they belong. So, yes.
Yes. I mean, this is probably a too broad a question, but I'll ask it anyway. Corporations, at home and abroad, there's been a consolidation of their power and their dominance since the mid-1980s. Do you see this process continuing ad infinitum, or do you see some sort of a challenge coming to it?
Now, do I see what happening ad infinitum?
Just this process of multinational or transnational corporate dominance of the global economic system. Do you see that continuing ad infinitum, or at least for the next coming decades? Or do you see some sort of a challenge or some sort of a resistance happening in terms of grassroots organization, etc.?
Ad infinitum is too long, but decades maybe, but grassroots resistance, that's going to take a long time. I don't want to be, I am sometimes known as a sort of foolishly optimistic, but I'm not that foolish. That is, I'm soberly foolish. I think that there are the possibilities for grassroots resistance, but it will take a lot more work in a lot more places in the world, including the United States, in order to counter the enormous power of the multinationals. It'll take 200 Chiapas rebellions, in third world countries and counterparts in industrialized countries. But it's a long haul. Yes.